invite you to bow your heads in prayer with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, may the words from my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you. You're our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Well, for those of you who are new here this morning, we've been working through a series on stewardship. We're calling it From Consumer to Steward, and what that looks like in relationship to the church, living as called children of God. We started the series talking about how stewardship really starts, and it makes sense, with looking at what you have been given and what you have, not what you do not have, okay, because that leads to a consumer mindset to chase those things that you don't have to secure your life in some capacity. And then we discussed the currency of time, that all time, every moment of every day of our lives belongs to God for him to use for his purposes. Time is something that God has given us to steward. And last week we discussed, or a couple weeks ago, discussed the currency of leadership and what really sets the church apart, us being the children of God in this world. It's how we have a currency of leadership to offer, not one through power, not one through authority in the culture or society, but the currency of leadership that manifests itself in service and in love. All right. Well, today, kind of stemming from that and relating to that, we're looking at the currency of relationships, and it might sound strange to look at relationships and frame them in light of this concept of currency, but we're going to be looking at what it means to steward relationships just briefly here today, what it means to use and utilize this currency of relationships. What does it mean to live within the framework of a currency of relationships? So we're actually going to start here this morning. Let's list off types of relationships that you and I have or may have throughout any given time. What are some types of relationships we have? Well, all right, we have neighboring relationships. Okay, what's today? Father's Day. So father-child relationships. Okay. Husband-wife relationships. Anything else? Friendships. All right. Friendships. Sorry? Employer. Boss-employee relationships. Okay. Client, professional. Okay. Or contractor, client, whatever the other name is, the opposite of the client is in any given organization. Okay. There's other broader categories like transactional relationships. Okay. Here we are in modern times, litigious relationships, okay? This year is going to be America's, 250? So we also have relationships, citizen relationships, okay? I mean, we could sit here and list off, but we all understand that there's different kinds of relationships. There's lists of types of relationships that we all experience, or there's labels for relationships we all live within, or how we use to organize our lives in these relationships. There's tons that we all exist in every given moment, different hats we put on every single day, depending on the person that we're interacting with, okay, or that we're walking or living amongst. But here's the challenge that we're going to explore here this morning. The challenge for all of us is that if we really are honest and we look at how we organize our lives in light of relationships, we label our relationships really solely by temporal means. Okay? If you think about it, none of the labels that we mentioned for those relationships, none of the labels for those types of relationships are forever. Okay? They're all temporal, all right? Contractor, professional, or client, professional, whatever those may end, right? Okay? Boss, employee, you might get a different job. Okay, you might move on, or your bosses change, employees change, the makeup of an organization change, okay? Transactional relationships change because guess what? You're probably not going to be a customer forever. Litigious relationships change, well, hopefully, okay? Even father-child relationships or husband and wife relationships change on any given time in the trajectory of life, both the seasons of those relationships, okay, as the child gets older, okay, but also in light of the nature of death. We label and we live life labeling our relationships solely by temporal means, things and labels and relationships that are not forever. And so we organize, as I mentioned, we organize our lives, we relate, we operate within these relationships solely driven by these temporary labels with no broader vision for them in our lives. And in a lot of times, with these different kinds of relationships, these different labels that we have, different categories we have that we organize our lives around, a lot of times, every single one of these relationships shares a hidden assumption. Every label treats the other as contingent. Maybe it's contingency on usefulness. Maybe it's contingency on performance, living up to expectations, or living up to the reasonable expectations that that relationship or that person within the relationship hopes to accomplish. I'm going to share with you a quote, kind of a good guiding quote for us here today, thinking about the currency of relationships. It's from C.S. Lewis in his book, The Weight of Glory. And it goes as follows. It's just a snippet from his work. There are no ordinary people. You, that's us, have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal. And their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, immortals whom we work with, immortals whom we marry, and on the negative side, immortals who we snub or even exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. C.S. Lewis gives, it might be a little vague right now, but we're going to walk through this. C.S. Lewis gives us the broader vision for our relationships, no matter what earthly or temporal labels we may place upon them. Every relationship that you and I have, or will have, every interaction with any person has eternal consequences. Because every person is immortal. The only thing that we interact with on any given day, are immortal people. We'll get to later whom God has created. So we talked through stewardship. This isn't unique to churches or ministries. Every organization, every person is stewarding in some capacity or thinking through stewardship, whether they use that label or not in their lives. Okay? They're looking at what they have and looking, how do we use these things for our purpose or whatever it might be. And the reality is every single person and every organization, this is not unique to the church, everyone and every organization runs on a currency of relationships. Okay? But what makes the church different in its calling and stewardship is that all other organizations, all other companies, all other people, and so forth, they're limited in vision and scope by the invisible or by the temporary labels that they've created or we've created within those relationships. God has given his church, God has given you and me the currency of relationships with a clear and broader and eternal vision for every interaction, for every person in our lives, every person that will be in our lives in any context or any earthly label that we place within them. So the question before us, to keep it really simple, do we let the world, these temporary and these passing labels, do we let the world define how we use the currency of relationships with those passing labels? Or are we driven and shaped by God's vision for relationships, for our relationships. God's vision that we are helping others, to go back to C.S. Lewis's quote, that we are helping others along to their eternal destiny. That there's an eternal vision for every person in every place, in every time. There's an eternal vision that God has for that person that is in any relationship with you. Okay? Are we driven and shaped by God's vision for relationships that he has placed in our lives? The reality is, if we were just mere mortals, okay, if we were just mere mortals and we labeled our relationships just on these earthly labels that we often do, okay, God would not have sent Jesus, the eternal Son of God, to restore God and humanity's relationship. Okay. To empty himself from his heavenly splendor, to become a servant to humans who often have limited vision. Okay. If you remember from our gospel reading, Jesus says these words as he's talking to his disciples. He said, I chose you. You did not choose me. Jesus knew clearly that humanity was destined for more. Destined for more than what this world has to offer. Destined for more than whatever label we have placed within our relationships. That every relationship and every person and every relationship between people has eternal weight behind them. It's for that knowledge, that vision that God has for humanity that Jesus died to grant us access to everlasting splendor, as C.S. Lewis states, as opposed to immortal horror. And we know this, that Jesus did not treat us contingently based off of maybe what we are useful for or how we perform, okay? Or what our limitations may or may not be. Jesus did not treat us contingently. Remember, as I just quoted, Jesus chose us, even though we did not choose him. Our Old Testament reading is a story, a common story that we have, one we've talked about in years past. Who is it about? Anybody remember? Those few verses in the Old Testament, two people named Naomi and Ruth. All right. Naomi and Ruth. Anybody know briefly their story or what we discussed here today or what you heard from the reading? Anybody know Naomi and Ruth's relationship? Yeah. Yeah, Ruth was a daughter-in-law. Okay? Ruth was a daughter-in-law. Everybody, so Naomi's husband, Ruth's husband, they died, okay, due to various reasons. And at that point, Naomi and Ruth served no purpose for each other pragmatically, especially for earthly survival. They served no purpose. There was nothing anymore holding them together where it would benefit either one of them. Okay, that they would stay together, especially when Naomi was heading back to Israel and Ruth would have to leave her homeland to go to a foreign land where it was just going to be risky for her, both in terms of life and also means and survival throughout every single day. And that's the crux of what takes place in the Old Testament reading today, the interaction between Naomi and Ruth, where Naomi is saying, you shouldn't come with me. There's no good for it for you. There's no reason. There's no pragmatic, useful purpose for you. And then what does Ruth say to her? What is the promise that Ruth says to Naomi? Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Okay? Ruth demonstrated a relationship, a commitment to a relationship beyond the earthly labels of daughter-in-law, beyond the pragmatic usefulness of what a relationship entails or what use that relationship would have for you, all right, in order to survive or to get ahead. But she demonstrated a relationship with eternal consequences, of foreverness, of faithfulness toward Naomi. And this is a Old Testament vision, an example of how God has loved all of humanity and loved all of you in Jesus. An example, a vision of Jesus' love for you and me. So what does this mean as we continue to unpack it? Okay, you may have heard me say this before. It's always good for us to kind of always bring to the highlight and forefront of our minds and our hearts that there is not one person, okay, there is not one person that God did not create, okay, with the purposes of an eternal, immortal destiny. Okay? There's not one person that God did not create with an eternal trajectory and destiny. There's not one person that God did not redeem, and there's not one person that God did not die for to grant them access to that eternal and everlasting splendor. So that means that there is not one person that you meet, that you lay eyes upon, that you form any type of relationship with, no matter those earthly labels, which are useful in their own right. Okay? There's not one person that you meet that is not on an eternal trajectory just like you. Nobody that you will look into that is not immortal. There's not one single person that comes in your midst that God did not place in front of you in that moment for a divine opportunity in your life. And related to that, there is not a single person in your midst that is not an opportunity for a relationship with those eternal consequences for that person and for you, that has eternal impact in every interaction and in that journey together, like Naomi and Ruth. And even more than that, like Jesus, who came to this world to walk amongst us, to love us eternally and forever. This is arguably, this currency of relationships, arguably the most unique and most important currency that we have and will explore. And here's why. We'll talk about the currency of time. We already did. Time is passing. Time is fleeting. Okay? Time is based off of, again, a world that is passing away, not based off of everlasting time. Okay? We'll talk about things like currency of money, which is commonly the most one we talk about or places talk about the most. But guess what? Is money staying forever? Money is not immortal. This is the only currency that has immortal divine impact on any given moment in any given day. This is perhaps the most important currency that God has given us to steward and to manage. So related to that, think about how we kind of managing or stewarding our resources. Say it's money. How many of you look at your bank account? All right? I'm guessing we all look at our bank account in some capacity. All right? Why would we look at our bank account? To be depressed. No, I'm just kidding. No. Why would we look at our bank account? Because you're trying to figure out what you have to be able to use it for things that you need or want or whatever the case may be, all right, to make sure that you are secure, or your loved ones are secure, and et cetera. You're taking an inventory of what God has given you, whether you frame it that way or not, okay, so that you can use it for right purposes. That's the idea of it, okay? But how seldom do we take an inventory of our relationships, all right? How seldomly do we take an inventory of our relationships like we would looking at any material thing that God has given us to steward, right? So our encouragement as we think about the currency of relationships and it being perhaps the most important currency that God has given us to steward because it's the only one with immortal, eternal consequences, okay, is for us to take an inventory of all our relationships on any given day throughout our lives. Any relationship, any label we place in them, as simple as the person at the grocery store that we run into, the family that we have, the friends that we have, the people that we pass by in our daily walks. Okay? Think of any context of interaction or relationships that we have. Okay? Take an inventory like we would looking at our bank account. Okay? Be able to say to ourselves, these are all divine opportunities. These are all eternal moments that God has given us, okay, that God has placed in our midst, okay, that have immortal and eternal consequences for that person and for me. Even every family relationship, father, son, father, daughter, husband, wife, exists to serve this bigger vision and this bigger purpose, this bigger eternal existence that we have. Just walk with me here. It's important for us to also think as a church, as a ministry here. It means everybody here right now, whether you know them or not, whether they've been worshiping here for 10, 15, 20 years, or if they're visiting for the first time, okay? I want you to think about those people in this room right now, okay? Every worshiper, all 90-plus enrolled children at Circle of Love, okay, and all of their family members, okay, all of their families, which could probably represent more than 300 if you think of it exponentially. Every time we step foot on this campus or families step foot on this campus on Family Sundays and so forth, okay, just picture those relationships, all those interactions. They are not just clients, okay? They are not just consumers, though they are in different ways. And we aren't just consumers of their enrollment or their numbers on Sunday morning, all of you, or in class Monday through Friday, right? This is how this vision, this broader vision that God has given us impacts how we think through everything we do and all that we live within on any given week. All these worshipers, all of you, every visitor, every enrolled child, all the families, everybody that we interact with here on campus or beyond, okay, think about that, even adding even more exponentially to that, they're all divine opportunities in which to love, in which to serve, within the broader eternal vision God has for them, for those people, for you, centered on how he first has loved us in Jesus. I'm going to re-quote C.S. Lewis here. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Other things, I'm adding some of my own parts, other things that we love, nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are all mortal. They're all passing, like labels within the relationships we have. And their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But because of God creating each person, God redeeming and dying for each person, including you and me, okay? It is immortals whom we joke with. It is immortals whom we work with. It is immortals whom we marry or we snub or exploit. All immortals heading in the trajectory of either immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. That you and I, in any given moment, because of the grace of God in Jesus, have the opportunity to walk alongside, to serve, to love, and to help along their eternal destiny. Amen.